Everyone. Hello, how's it going? How's this climate week? Are we doing good? It's Friday. We made it. We made it to Friday, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, thank you. I'm Dani Nierenberg. I'm president and co-founder of Food Tank. I am so thrilled to be with you all today. Again, happy Climate Week. I want to acknowledge the space that we're in because it's WNYC's 100th birthday. Please give them a round of applause. I'm really thrilled to be here for our summit on building resilient food systems for all. This is a really important, I think, reflection on what we've learned this week, and we'll hear from a lot of great experts. And I think it's never been more important to come together in support of food and agriculture systems as sort of a key solution to the climate crisis. As we know, 2023 and 2024 were the hottest summers on record, or 2024 will likely be the hottest summer on record. We've seen biodiversity plummet all over the globe. We're seeing more frequent heat waves, droughts, flooding. But it doesn't have to be this way, and I think that's what we should focus on. Many communities and individuals around the world are already creating change. There are farmers who are introducing climate-smart agriculture practices to heal their land. Researchers are helping us understand our plant's biodiversity to improve nutrition security, and new technologies and innovations are helping businesses monitor and reduce their environmental impact. But we really do have to keep up the pressure, and I think that's what we've all learned during Climate Week, that food and agriculture systems need to continue to be at the center of these climate conversations. And we need to break down silos to make sure that we have people talking to one another, farmers talking to nutritionists, scientists and researchers talking to government officials, and really getting these messages out there. So we have a fantastic agenda today that is made up of experts from all over the globe, CEOs, business leaders, food waste warriors, educators, youth, and so many others. And so you're gonna hear real stories of hope, and I think that's really exciting. So I wanna thank our collaborators at the Arrell Food Institute, particularly Evan Fraser and Alice Rain. Please give them a round of applause. They really made today's agenda incredible, and I'm so honored to work with them. It's I've known Evan and admired him from afar for a long time, and so it's just like, he knows my name. And I want to thank the team at Great Performances. Did you all enjoy your breakfast? Give them a round of applause. Liz Newmark, Janelle Cruikshank, and Laura Traeger have been amazing, and we couldn't have pulled off this week without them. I want to get a little bit of housekeeping out of the way. The sessions you hear today will be very fast-paced and dynamic, so if I cut somebody off, forgive me later. We just want to make sure that we hear from everyone and get to as many conversations as possible. We haven't really built breaks in, so go outside when you need to, get a drink of water, etc. I also hope you'll share the moments that stand out to you using the hashtag ClimateWeekNYC. And if you have a critique or a suggestion, my phone is right over there, and I'll be checking it throughout the day. So you can email me at Danielle@foodtank.com and tell me if we're doing badly, and I'll fix it. Okay. So now I get to talk to my friend Evan. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
He's the director of the Arrell Food Institute and also a wonderful professor. So I'm so delighted to sit down with him. And I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about why you wanted the Arrell Food Institute to be here at Climate Week, especially this year, 2024.
Well, let's just take a historic perspective. One of the things I've done in my career is look at the rise and fall of civilization at the biggest sort of level and link that to the food system. And I can say, having published a lot of stuff on this subject, that the lessons of history are actually quite optimistic. The years and decades and generations when progress and prosperity prevail is more numerous than the crises.
Great.
And history gives us a lot of pessimism as well. So a lot of optimism, but some of the worst chapters of history emerge when we fail to steward our food systems. The French Revolution, for instance, was triggered when El Nino-induced droughts brought peasants into protest the price of bread. Lots of other examples. So in answer to your question, Dani, of why it's important for all of us, Arrell Food Institute, but all of us in this room to stand up and say, we need to pay attention to food systems, is because in this moment of great inflection, of great political turmoil, of great climactic turmoil, of humanity sort of waking up and realizing that we really only have this one planet, if we want to steer us towards that optimistic outcome, we have to be present and accounted for. And showing up at a place like New York and racing from 56th down to the stock exchange over to the UN building and back, and wearing my shoes out and being away from my family for a week and thinking, what am I doing? Which I think we're all feeling on Friday of Climate Week. It's vital for us to stand up and be accounted for and participate in the conversation.
It is. And I've been talking about this a lot this week too, this idea of it being a citizen eater. You know, it's not just about voting, it's about sort of being in the world in a way that you want to help contribute, you know, to a positive outcome in our food and agriculture systems. Why was it important for you though to focus this particular event on resilience, and I think resilience might be becoming one of those words that's overused. So, like, I would love to hear from you what it means to you.
Well, I mean, let's drop back as to why. The why is the assumptions that the food system that has nourished us and not nourished many of us for our lives, the system that emerges in the 1950s and 60s and 70s with the Green Revolution, it's got a series of assumptions on it. The assumption that it's easy to trade food across wide distances and across national borders, that energy is cheap, that water and soil are abundant, and that the climate is stable. And those assumptions are obviously chipped away at. We cannot make the same assumptions today that perhaps were made in the 1960s and 70s and 80s. So we need to have an alternative, and that alternative needs to be able to withstand and bounce back from major perturbations. And for me, resilience has at least those two components, the ability to withstand perturbation and the ability to bounce back quickly after a shock. So that's a high-level answer. You're right, though. Resilience is one of those words that's going to become quickly overused. My good friend and colleague Shakuntala is here. Shakuntala and I have both experienced with the United Nations High-Level Panel of Experts. Next year, the Committee on World Food Security's theme is resilience. I'm in the middle of wrapping up a project with the Global Panel for Agriculture and Food Systems for Nutrition. Well, those are a lot of mouthfuls, a lot of words there.
You're a nerd.
Yeah, I'm a nerd.
Right.
Well, this theme of that project is resilient food systems in Africa. So I think we are aware ontologically and existentially we need more resilience, and we're all jumping on that bandwagon.
Yeah, I agree. And it's great that we're finally all sort of on the same pathway in that way and responding to these shocks. But Evan, we're also, and I hate this word, and I talked to you about it, polycrisis. We have biodiversity loss, we have the climate crisis, we have conflict.
Yeah, you're the nerd now.
We have what did I say? The climate crisis, biodiversity, public health, conflict, what else? I mean, there's so many things. Nutrition, yeah.
Trade.
So when we're trying to create resilience and all of those things are happening simultaneously, we need answers and solutions and innovations that address all of those, right?
Yeah, I mean, 2 points there. I can't stand the phrase polycrisis. I've been thinking cascading crisis as perhaps a bit less nerdy a way of talking about it. But anyhow, you can have that one.
I'll steal it.
Yours. So one of the things that I've been trying to think about is, at a food system perspective, maybe there's lines of defense that we need to be shoring up on, and maybe the agri-ecosystem that a farmer or a fisher is participating in is the first line of defense. And there's things we can shore up at the agri-ecological line. Better soil health, more crop diversity, being ways of creating resilience at the farm level. But then there's that whole household and community level of defense, or line of defense, where your natural capital and your social capital and your financial capital, now I'm becoming nerdy, are the critical things that a community or a household will marshal in the face of a polycrisis. And then you move up almost to the institutional level, perhaps, and start seeing the safety nets that a government can offer as a final line of defense against a crisis. And the way I've been trying to articulate this issue recently is, what can we do to build up each individual type line of defense, agro-ecosystem, community and household, bod, institution, and are things that happen at one line of defense maybe causing inadvertent consequences at others. So for instance, a food safety policy imposed by the government to make food safer may make production less affordable for small-scale farmers. So there might be a trade-off there. And I've been working with colleagues across a number of African countries right now, Malawi, Ethiopia, and Sierra Leone, about what they can do to create pathways to resilience that acknowledges that if you do one thing, you may have a trade-off against something else. And then what can you do to mitigate that trade-off? And that's the sort of systems thinking that I think we all need to adopt.
Absolutely. Those unintended consequences are really, you have to keep those in mind all the time, because I think during the Green Revolution, when the world was on this path to save so many millions of people from starvation, we didn't realize that there would be all of these unintended consequences that are happening now. I'm so glad to hear you're working in Malawi. My husband, Dr. Bill Burke, is watching from Malawi, so say hello. And hopefully you can meet him one day. I'm wondering, Evan, you put together such a great agenda. You worked really hard with Alice and others to do that. What are you most excited about today, and what do you sort of anticipate from the day?
Well, I'm a big believer that, I'm going to quote David Nabarro, friend to many of us, I'm sure, in the room, architect of the Sustainable Development Goals, has become, luckily, a mentor for me in the last number of years.
He's a rock star.
He is a rock star, and I follow him around at things like I'm a fanboy, no question at all. He said, don't anticipate outcomes, set momentum and trajectory, and hang on.
Yep, buckle up.
So I am a big believer in almost everything that David says to me, and they almost always right. And in a world of non-linear change, to again use another really nerdy phrase, in a world that is very hard to predict outcomes, I don't try to predict outcomes anymore. I'm suspicious of the what does success look like in 5 years type question.
Me too.
Because we don't know what 5 years is going to look like. What you do is you build a coalition of willing people you like to work with, that you share values with, and you build up as much of a head of momentum as you possibly can, and you hold on. And you hold on to each other. And I think in this chaotic, crazy, oil-soaked world of ours, that is the right philosophy to take. So it's a coalition-building exercise, it's a community-building exercise, it's a conversation-building exercise, and let's just hold on.
Hold on, everyone. We're going to get started. Thank you so much,
Thank
Evan.
you.
You're awesome.
Thank you. You're awesome, too.
Thank you. We're now going to turn to our next conversation, and it is my true honor to welcome Shakuntala Thilsted, the Director of Nutrition, Health, and Food Security Impact Area Platform at the CGIAR, and the recipient of the 2021 World Food Prize. Please give this wonderful woman a round of applause. So nice to see you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here. You're somebody I obviously know, but I admire you so much. So it's so great to have you here. I'm wondering if you can quickly talk about what the data are showing us about hunger and malnutrition globally. It's not the greatest picture, is it?
No. And with the last Sophia report, the 2024 report, I think even though we knew things were not going well,
right,
and there were many challenges to where we should be moving towards, first with the COVID and then with the wars and unprecedented climate changes,
right,
for example, in Africa, we didn't really expect those values we saw in the Sophia report. And I think many of us were quite sad about it.
Yeah.
And then we know that many are working towards making it better, but
right,
we aren't seeing great movements.
It is, and the SOFI report is the state of food insecurity that the UN Food and Agriculture Organization puts out every year.
Yeah.
And it didn't paint the best picture. And you're right, we've been through all these crises, and that's not helping the situation.
And I like to work out in the field.
Right.
I work a lot in Africa, I work a lot in Asia. And when you go to the villages and talk to people, there's a lot of concern about what they pay for food. So affordability is a big problem. And not only in Asia and Africa. Last week, I taught one day at the University of Copenhagen, and talking to students, they tell you about the cost of food,
right,
and how difficult it is to be able to follow the recommendations that are given for and now it's just not healthy, but also to take into consideration sustainability. And young people do want to take into consideration. They really do want to, but it's not that easy for them to do.
No, and I'm glad that you brought up, college campuses across the world. Hunger is often a big issue there, but when we're talking about the global south, these issues are particularly severe because people are living on the brink. One missed meal, one missed, rain can really make their whole lives.
And if you talk to women out in the field with children, they have aspirations for their children, and they, I would nearly say, instinctively know that if you feed a child well, that this child is going to grow up to be healthy and will perform better at school, will perform better at work. So, it's difficult.
Yeah, you bring up the question of women. And, they make up at least 43% of farmers all over the world, but they are so often overlooked in extension policies and development policies and, the funding and finance that goes to agriculture. How can we change that?
Well, I'd start at another place. I'd say let's start with young women and let's give them the possibilities and give them the skills, the experience, the knowledge, so that they can move the needle. And now we see, even with technologies, that there is a discrepancy as to how it's reaching young men and reaching young women.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying forget those who are already past the stage of learning or in school, but we do have a great opportunity to jump if we would focus on the youth and focus especially on young women.
I love that because often we look at those two populations sort of, oh gosh, how are we going to deal with the young people? How are we going to deal with, women who are undereducated? But if you look at them as an opportunity, it really shifts the whole dialogue. It's an exciting time. I'm wondering if you can talk about some of the new measures to monitor health in food and agriculture systems. I know that's something that you're deeply interested in, and then what these new innovations are and how they can help us make better decisions.
Well, there's a lot of thinking and a lot of work around what's new and what can we do that's new, as I said, with the data technologies and now with AI. But I worry sometimes, maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I worry sometimes because it's as if we are jumping to new solutions and forgetting what we already have.
Right.
So how do we combine, for example, traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge, practices, which are not, I don't think, geared towards putting into space with AI and data, because knowledge, much of the knowledge that I've worked in aquatic food systems is what I've gathered from hearing people talk. And it's storytelling. It's not numbers.
Right.
So how do you combine storytelling on the one hand and experiences which are told in parables and stories with data technology and further on with AI? I don't understand, but there must be ways to do that and combine both the different types of knowledge, the different types of technologies, and get the best out of it for us to move further.
I totally agree, and I'm counting on the young people we'll hear from later to come up with those solutions. How do you combine the sort of high-tech stuff with that traditional citizen indigenous knowledge that cannot be forgotten because we have lost so much of it?
One of the issues that I hear when I talk to people in the field, all the people, they talk a lot about seasonality and the benefits of seasonality. When you talk to those dealing with technologies and with data, they talk about how the disadvantages of technologies.
Right.
So right there you can get a good example about how different it is. And if it's so different, and if people see things so differently, then how are you going to combine it to get the best of both?
Right. So important to be able to do that. And I wonder, I like this idea of all of us going forward by going back and not forgetting, that all all of that citizen science, all of that data. I mean, farmers are the best scientists, right? They're experimenting in fields every day, and especially women who are producing the crops that people actually eat, you know, the fruits and vegetables that actually nourish people.
I've grown up in an Indian family that really uses fruit and vegetables in the seasons of plenty, and there are so many different ways for home preservation, which does not require refrigeration.
Right.
And that's how I saw seasonality being used in a positive manner.
And it's not just for fruits and vegetables, right? It's also for fish. And that's
very
a really
much so.
important protein
Yes.
for so many people around the globe.
And it also takes into consideration affordability.
Right.
Because if you can harvest in the season of plenty, and then, for example, dry and keep for the season where there is little, then you would be able to tackle parts of the issues we have with affordability.
Right, and that nutrition and security, so that, you know, when the hunger season that we hear about, that doesn't have to exist if we're preserving foods and they are available and affordable and accessible to
And
folks.
now with, again, combining new and old methods, if we would really use solar energy, for example, drying.
Right.
We would reach so much further in being able to preserve food and reduce loss and waste, which is such a big issue. It's
So
not
huge.
just about producing more and using techniques to get a higher productivity, but it's also about much more reducing loss and waste.
I'm so glad you brought up that production point. We've been so good at filling people up, Shakuntala, but we have not been good at nourishing them. And so it doesn't have to be about yields, it can be about quality. I'm wondering, one thing that worries me, and I know worries you, is that too little of the climate finance, just about 4%, goes towards food and agriculture systems. Have you heard anything this week during Climate Week that gives you hope that we can increase that number?
No, but I do hope. No, I know.
I tried.
But I do hope that with all the discussions we are having now, and if we can continue those discussions into COP28.
Yeah.
29, yeah.
29, yes.
29. Then I think we would be able maybe to get some commitments at COP29. And if you can put that down in writing for different countries, I think we can reach somewhere. But it's not just quantity of finance, it's also quality
Good
of
point.
finance.
Can you talk more about that? Where would you like to see that sort of centered?
Well, I think it's who's in the room when we are discussing whatever amount we get, how that is being used.
Who needs to be in the room? Who needs to be at the table?
I think we should also invite communities to the
Bravo. Yeah, they're left out of these conversations.
Yes, and we even have the techniques. You don't have to be physically together. We have the techniques where we can have policymakers listen and talk with community members.
Yeah, so little of that is happening, and I think policymakers are scared, right? They don't actually want to hear from communities. So I think, the farmers' movements that are taking place across the globe, like La Via Campesina and others, are such sort of advocates for that, getting farmers into those conversations and making sure that they're heard.
And if policymakers think that they must, they have to report to governments, and government officials think only about the term of which they have voted in, then we are missing out on many of the opportunities that we need to think long term and to take into consideration the benefits we can give to people to whom it matters.
Absolutely. Politics is getting in the way of that long-term thinking that will really nourish people and the planet.
So you asked me about measures and how we can move with this. So if we had measures that go beyond or also include other values. For example, if we had measures that value the young child growing up and what it means to having a good nutrition, what it means, for example, for cognition and school performance, and later for work performance, and this intergenerational benefits that you have. We don't have ways to measure that in a way that people understand the value, and that then you can have policymakers and politicians being aware of this value and paying attention to it and wanting to move further with it.
Yeah, it's a cultural shift, right, to have those values sort of honored and recognized and those values valued, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned COP29, which is coming up in November, and I know many people are not going to Azerbaijan, but I think it's important to keep the momentum that has happened over the last 4 or 5 years and getting food and agriculture at the center of these discussions. Are you hopeful about what could happen there?
Yes, Danny, I am. Because if you would just take, 5 years ago, we did not think we could get that combination of climate and food.
Right.
And we have. And we had the commitments last year.
Right.
And it's written down in paper, and it's written very clearly that there is a link between climate and food. Right? So I do think we have to keep at it. What else do we have? Do we want to give up? No, we can't give up. So we just have to move further and make sure we bring more people on board and bring also different ways of looking at the issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And breaking down those silos, which Evan talked about. I wonder.
No, I'm very positive after the declarations we had last year. And when we started in 2007 trying to get this integration, and I think we've reached far.
We have reached really far. Thanks to people like you, thanks to people like Evan, we have gone really far in raising food and agriculture. We have that foundation to stand on now at these the UN climate change conferences that happen every year.
It's hard work.
It's such hard work. I mean, you've been doing it, so long. We have all been trying to figure out how to get those conversations going. I wonder if you have a call to action to this room. This is the end of Climate Week. People have learned so much. They've probably gotten angry about so much. But what do you want to leave them with?
Well, I think it's not just. I was a week ago, or more than a week ago, in Kigali.
I saw you. Yes.
At the African Food Systems Forum, and yes, I know we talk about how much it costs individually, globally, to get together as a community and the different voices, the very many people. But I do think that the advantages outweigh the and what we want to get and what we are getting by working together and being together, just talking and listening to each other. I think that's extremely positive.
I do too. That was a wonderful conference in that way, because there were so many people from
and there were so many young people.
So many young people, and farmers and farmers groups and fishers and others working on these things. It was really exciting. So I agree with you. So everyone, I think that's a good call to action, to get together, to talk to one another, to talk to people who don't agree with you, I also think is very important. Thank you so much. It's always an honor to see you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. This woman is a hero. She's a global heroine, and I am so honored to know her. I'm getting chills now. In this next session, we get to talk about how we create a collaborative path forward to address food, health, and climate. So I get to welcome our panelists, people I really admire. Christine Datz-Romero, the Executive Director of the Lower East Side Ecology Center. Give her a round of applause, please. Stephen Jennings, who is the Stakeholder Relations and Brand Lead for Health and Sustainability at Ahold Delhaize. Did I say it right? USA. USA. John De La Parra, who is the Director of the Rockefeller Foundation's Food Initiative. Hey, John. And my friend Jess Fanzo, who is a Professor of Climate and the Director of the Columbia Climate School Food for Humanity Initiative. That is a mouthful. I like it. It has all the words I like. I just need to take a brief moment to thank some of our in-kind partners, including Arrow Farms Appeal, Adorea, Beans is How, Bonterra Wine, Bowery Farming, Brooklyn Brewery, Certified Origins, Flora Food Group, Farmers Fridge, and Gotham Greens. That's a mouthful. Okay. Jess, I always like starting panels with you, and I always put you on the spot. So you're going first. Can you talk about, just sort of broadly the link between climate and health?
So I think we all know we are in the midst of a climate crisis, and we are all starting to experience these very unpredictable, more immediate extreme events that are associated with climate change, be they heat waves, prolonged droughts, flooding, wildfires. And these are having huge impacts on health outcomes for people around the world, and will continue if we take no action on climate change. And it really goes through what I call the three main pathways: the health system, the water system, and the food system pathways. And that's where we're seeing the manifestations on health impacts. I focus more on nutrition, and the links between climate change and extreme events on nutrition outcomes, be it growth, development, micronutrient deficiencies. We're starting to see that very clearly, with food systems being the major pathway towards that. The problem is, Danny, and I think many of you know, John knows well, we're already grappling with a huge burden of malnutrition in the world. We have about 750 million people who go to bed hungry. I think it's something like 2.8 billion people are overweight and obese now. We still have a very unfinished agenda. I can't see this group. Sorry.
I know, it's hard over
my
there.
back's to you. And I'm old, so I can't turn. Anyway, an unfinished agenda around undernutrition with stunting and wasting, and now these famines that are devastating to Sudan and Gaza and other places around the world. And on top of that, we have, I'm going to really depress everybody, but the rest of the panel is going to lift us up. We have these extreme events that are compounding and cascading. And so you've got multiple extreme events coming together for many communities with this big burden of malnutrition, in which every country deals with at least one form of malnutrition. Not one country is immune.
Right.
So this makes it really hard for governments, NGOs, organizations like Christine's organization, which are trying to grapple with this complexity. So we're asking a lot for our food systems to function. You know, they're getting hit by these shocks, and it's affecting these communities that are, and so I think we're in a situation where we can do a lot across food systems. Food systems have a big role to play in addressing malnutrition, as well as the climate change agenda. And to me, this is where there's hope. And we've had so many side events this week, and I promise to be positive about them. Although, anyway. But there's a huge amount of momentum around food right now, which is amazing. I think one of the, and I'll be quiet after this, I think one of a bit of the limitations, if you go to the COP meetings and the other more global negotiations, is that nutrition specifically is being a little bit neglected. You're seeing health systems, you're seeing food systems enter the climate agenda, but nutrition is often the orphan. It always has been in international development. So how do we as the nutrition community integrate ourselves better into the climate community and sit at that table and start working with the climate community a bit more?
I love that, and you're so good at doing that. Thank you for the work you've done over the years, and you're still very young, so I don't know what you're talking about, because if you're old, I'm old, and I'm not going to go there. Christine, Shakuntala brought up food loss and food waste, and food waste, as we all know, I hope we all know by now, is a huge contributor to the climate crisis, mainly when it goes in landfills, right? Because it's such a waste there in so many different ways, and then it emits methane, which is such a powerful greenhouse gas that we're now only starting to pay attention to. I'm wondering if you can talk about how we tackle both food waste and as a way to sort of benefit both climate and health.
Yeah, sure. And thank you for inviting me to this panel. And so my name is Christina Datz-Romero, and I work with very much a grassroots organization here in New York City, the Lower East Side Ecology Center. And we do composting programs, and very familiar with the statistics, but I just want to, rattle them off. About a quarter of our waste stream right now is food waste, right? So that's really it's a shame here in the United States how much food really goes wasted into a landfill. We all know what happens once it ends up there. It generates methane gas. And landfills are the third largest emitter of methane gas here in the United States, so it's also huge. And just to give you another statistic about it, if we captured or prevented all that methane gas from being released, it would be the equivalent of taking 50 million private cars off the road. So, you know, it's an opportunity. I like to look at things positive and say we have an opportunity to change things. And besides from like really accelerating our climate crisis, when we put food in the waste system, we also really losing the value of that food, right? Because we can make wonderful compost out of food scraps that then can really feed into the food system. It can really further like sustainable regenerative agriculture, and it's just really important to do so because it's like a closed loop system. It's a natural system that we all, you know, need to bring into our lives and need to bring into big systems such as New York City to really make a difference.
Thank you for explaining all of that. And I just want to give you a shout out because you've been doing this work for a long time. You've been working within your community. You are a food waste warrior. You are a warrior for communities. Please give her a round of applause. She's one of the best people in this city. Thank you, Christine. John, the last time we got to hang out, we were talking about the Periodic Table of Food Initiative, and Jess was talking about nutrition earlier, and I'm wondering if you can explain, we call it the PTFI for all of those in the know, but it's a really cool project. Yep. It's hard for me to explain sometimes, but you can do it really well.
Sure, I'll explain it. So thanks everyone. So I'm John De La Parra, director on the food initiative at the Rockefeller Foundation, and about 5 years ago I transitioned from academia into philanthropy in part to develop this really cool project called the Periodic Table of Food Initiative, which is an effort to develop standardized, comprehensive analyses of the world's food supply. And you might think that sounds kind of boring and maybe we already know what we need to know about our food, but the truth is that we usually measure about 100, maybe 150 things that are in our food. Like you see the back of a food label and you see maybe a couple dozen things, but there are tens of thousands of compounds in our food that might be nutritious compounds. They might be what we call exogenous compounds, or compounds like pesticides or other products that are on the outsides of the food. But those things aren't measured in a standardized, comprehensive way until we developed this project called the Periodic Table of Food Initiative. And it's starting to become a really powerful tool, in part because we built it with communities around the world. Yeah. We have 9 centers of excellence, 7 of which are in the global south, so that people in their communities can ask and answer the questions about their food that they want to know. And some of those questions that we're seeing, so we funded, for instance, fellowships in every one of these centers of excellence to explore what exactly are the questions that people in these communities have about their foods. So what we're seeing is, you know, how do different practices affect the composition of my food, for instance. That ultimately leads to nutritional questions. So one of the big questions around things like agroecology, regenerative agriculture, and even practices associated with traditional ecological knowledge is how and how much do those practices change the composition of the foods that we're eating as compared to what we call conventional or industrialized agriculture. There are some studies done here and there, but there hasn't been a wide-scale, comprehensive study to definitively show that these foods are changing composition in a way that can improve human health. And that's, you know, one of the reasons that we developed this is so for the first time we have really strong empirical comparable data that can be used everywhere around the world.
The data and the standardization are very cool, and I nerd out on those, obviously. But what I like most about the PTFI is that what you said before about you've brought all these centers of excellence together. You're involving communities. There's a lot of co-creation. There's a lot of talking to those with lived experience and farmers, and they're a central part of this. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, from the very beginning, you might think, well, what foods get analyzed, right? Because there's thousands of foods to look at. So from the very beginning, we started by talking to not just academics, not just people in industry, but community leaders, women's groups, farmer groups, to nominate foods that were important to those people. And actually, we published a paper in Nature Food at the beginning of this year that explicitly talks about the methodology we took to select what would be the first about 1,700 foods that we are inspired to analyze that need additional analysis. And then in what we call the demonstration projects, because now you have all of these data, the question becomes, so what? We collect lots of data on lots of things, but how are we going to actually functionalize that? So we started to develop these demonstration projects with farmers. And in addition to things like the actual composition, so maybe you see all these chemical molecules and the quantities of them in a food, we also collect what we call the metadata. So we've developed things like a regenerative agriculture metadata module that allows us to collect lots of information, like all the different practices that might be used to grow those foods. And this is all done in partnership with farmers. Our first pilot is in Ghana and Kenya. And how might we grow those foods? How are those foods processed? How are they stored? All those things can change the chemistry of food. So, only by talking to people are you able to actually get to all this types of additional knowledge to answer the questions that are important.
It's so fundamental to everything that you're doing. It's so exciting too, and I can't wait to see what keeps coming out of this. So thank you for that work. Stephen, yesterday, one of our panelists quoted Monty Python and said, now for something completely different. So I want to talk to you about retailers. And, you've been such a good partner over the last year and a half to the White House and Food Tank on, the White House National Strategy on Hunger, Health, and Nutrition, or Nutrition and Health. I get it confused all the time. But I'm wondering how you can talk, if you can talk about how a retailer like Ahold, Delhaize, USA is working with other companies and organizations to support a way of farming that centers health.
Yeah, so not the easy question to start with, but so if you don't know who we are the largest East Coast grocery retail group stretching from Maine to Georgia and over to Kentucky and Tennessee there. So, and first and foremost, I'm a grocery nerd. Danny knows this. So I started 28 years ago as a bagger in one of our stores outside Philadelphia, and I just fell in love with the business. Everything from, the basics all the way to these complicated conversations that we have today around healthy food access, affordability, all the things that people try not to touch sometimes because it gets a little scary. So I have two partnership examples to share first. And one is, we have those scalable partnerships, and a lot of those are actually very fresh this year. And that's with our CPG partners. So if we want to scale something, bring something to market, we go to those partners to figure out how to do that. So an example would be partnership with Kellanova that was announced earlier. They had a great event actually yesterday, I believe it was. And it was highlighting how to transition a popular product, partnering with the local farmers in North Carolina to provide regenerative wheat that would be commingled to create Cheez-Its. So everyone knows Cheez-Its, so that's a great kind of door in. But that's one product, right? And we could argue, that's maybe not the healthiest product, but it's a product people know. And then just think about subliminally, it starts to provoke the conversation around, oh, well, that's cool, tell me more. And then we have other partnerships with shrimp decarbonization, with Thai Union, and then just last week, a co-investment with General Mills on transitioning 70,000 acres to regenerative practices. That's all great, right? But I'm going to tell you what the biggest struggle is. And this is just my personal take. So my friends live streaming, I might get some nasty grams about it, but it's the importance of internal partnerships. So I know you all work with organizations. I guarantee you, we all have silos that we have to fight, break down in order to work together to bring things to life. Well, when it comes to healthier food access and affordability, we literally have to talk to every functional area within our organization. And just like our customers, not everyone buys into some of these things, right? So we have to fight some of those, dispel some things. And it's the biggest thing for us is the perception that health doesn't sell. So we already have that barrier on the customer side and on the supply and demand with the internal side. So those are things that we've been working on, I would say a lot. if I hear the word socialization one more time, it is driving me crazy. We've socialized to death. But if we never get internal buy-in from the merch team to HR to pricing, like we're never going to be able to scale and bring this together for our customers. So that's what we're focusing on every day.
It's so interesting because you're talking about silo breaking within an institution, and the reason I wanted all of you on this panel is because you're all doing very different things, and so it comes back to what Stephen is talking about, this idea of communication, socialization. I don't know what that means, but like communication. And so I'm wondering if you can all talk about communication among different kinds of organizations to increase that silo breaking, so that nutritionists are part of the conversation, that retailers are part of the conversation, that these local communities and scientists are part of these conversations that are often so spread out where no one's talking to each other. And I don't know who wants to go first, or not at all.
I can hop in. Well, just to extend, it's an extension of what I was saying, is that a lot of us do this individually. Some of it we would internally say, oh, he's passionate. That's another word that's kind of almost disparaging in some senses. He's passionate about the topic. But it's pulling from information, whether it's from nonprofits, it's from folks like Rockefeller, it's others that are doing great work in this space that's outside of what we know, which is food. Like, we know the food business. So we need partners to not only educate ourselves, but for us to then take that back to those silos that I was referring to educate them that, you know what, healthier products are actually good for business. They actually tend to have higher margins. And oh, by the way, there's more and more every day a demand for these types of products. And if we're not providing that as a business, as a retailer, someone else is going to, and we're going to miss the boat.
Yeah. Christine?
Yeah, sure. My example, I guess, of our silo is most people see us as an environmental organization, which we certainly are. And during the pandemic, it really was sort of a breaking point where we all of a sudden couldn't offer our programs anymore. And it really challenged us to think about our impacts, and also challenged us to think about, the pandemic and what it meant for our community. And out of that thinking came a new program that we're doing about food justice. So connecting composting, food waste to agriculture, and then also connecting really to our community. So we have a food justice program that is a workforce development program. So we teach young people about growing food, but we also do an intergenerational. So we're also learning from our community. We're learning from older people that are living in the community about how they value food, what kind of food they like, and we're growing it in a garden with our partner, Henry Street Settlement. So I think, just finding these common things where you can really connect the dots is really important, and it needs to happen also very much on a community level. That's what we do.
Absolutely. I feel like the PTFI has been so good at sort of doing this, breaking down those silos, bringing different folks together.
Sure, it's true, but actually what comes to mind is an example around just the term regenerative agriculture, because as we obviously want to we want to understand how food changes with the PTFI from being regenerative to conventional, but what the heck does regenerative mean? It can mean so many things, and there are so many definitions. And shout out to a group called A Growing Culture, which, if you don't know what they are, amazing group, but they have conceptualized the idea of regenerative agriculture as being on a spectrum from shallow to deep. And we've adopted that and modified it a little bit as we start to think through this. On the shallow end, you think just about soil health, which is important. And it's often, for industry, the only or the main piece of what regenerative means to them. And what that actually means, can mean a lot of things. And then as you move towards the center, you might think about biodiversity. You might think about water and how water moves through the system. And then on the deep end, you think about people and justice and social aspects, maybe spirituality. And we hope to, and all of this takes conversation to bring all these things to the front, and we hope to push things further towards that deep end. And I think that's where we need to be. I mean, I might argue that actually we should start at the deep end. We need to start with people, not start with the soil side.
You can clap.
Thanks. Yeah, so and all of that takes conversation, right? Because we words are important, and we throw them around, especially this whole week. I'm sure you've heard the term regenerative thousands and thousands of times, but what does it actually mean? What does it mean as juxtaposed to agroecology or traditional ecological knowledge? I think those are really important things. And then thinking about what is an actual conceptualization of it and how is it being implemented in the world.
Thank you so much, John. Jess, can I turn to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think as researchers, you always want to kind of stay in your lane, but we kind of don't have a choice anymore.
Yeah.
I'll give the two examples of the people who are already on stage. I mean, Shakuntala and I work on something called the Lancet Commission Part 2. Get ready. Or with Evan, we worked on the EU Science Policy Interface. I can't even remember the name of that report right now. But, sorry, EU. But, and we have something called the Food Systems Countdown Initiative that John knows well. It's hard to work with other disciplines and sectors and systems. It takes time to learn each other's language. In the countdown, we bring about 65 food system scientists together to monitor the world's food systems. And we settled around 50 indicators that we hope will be adopted into the post-2030 agenda, just to add to the already 175 indicators, just to make life more complicated, because scientists like to do that. But it's hard.
Yeah.
It is hard to bring this group together to come to consensus on science. Right, Shakuntala? It's difficult. I mean, but we don't have a choice if we want to be able to diagnose what the problems are and provide solutions, because the solutions are not the silver bullets. It's not one discipline, one sector that has to solve it now. All of these issues are vexing and require a lot of voices and input from grassroots community organizations to high-level political policy entities. So we sort of need to do all of it now. And I think that's why there's a lot of people in the room, particularly the younger generations, that are learning more about what does it mean to move systems. Mm-hmm. And when you're involving systems, you're involving a lot of different players. And I think the way John and I were trained, much more traditional, I was trained as a molecular nutritionist. So random. Anyway, I think a lot of us are trained in a very traditional way, and that's completely changing in academia of how people are trained.
It's because people like you and John have changed it, though, and people like Shakuntala and so many others have changed the way the way academia works, and I think that's really important. It also gives me great comfort, Jess, that you said we don't have a choice, and I know that might sound odd, but I'm like, okay, then we don't have a choice. We all have to figure this out together and collaborate and swerve off that pathway that you were talking about, because we're always on that one particular road. It gives me great comfort to swerve. So thank you for articulating that. In the last, I'm going to put another 30 seconds on the clock. In the last 2 minutes that we have left, I'd like a call to action from each of you. And Christine, if I can start to you. I think during Climate Week, we should always end these panels with a call to action, because I want people to feel invigorated and that they have a to-do list.
Sure, yeah. I mean, my call to action would be to really get involved in your community and do something, even if it's something small, like starting to separate your food waste. It makes a difference. And don't think just because you don't perceive like you have power, you do. And you can really be the leading example and just feel good about yourself, because I think it really radiates out, and it also creates change.
Thank you, my friend Stephen.
Yeah, so I know it's a little cheesy to say, but it really goes back to your purchase power. And we talk about votes. Your purchase in a store is a vote. And that's what increases demand, which increases supply, and so on. And again, I know that's easy to say, right? But if you don't see something, ask for it. That also creates that pocket of demand and that request that we can take back not only to our vendors and suppliers, but one thing we do influence is our portfolio of wonderful private brand products. Those are places where we can influence, whether it's reformulations or increasing healthier assortments, and we're doing that all behind the scenes. So that's my go-to when you go to your store, but also be kind. Be kind to your grocer, be kind to your cashier, to your bagger. They work so hard. They made it through COVID as well.
Yeah.
Just let's be kind to each other.
Love it. Thank you, John.
Yeah, I think that For me, the most important thing has been to center Indigenous and frontline voices in any of these conversations. And just yesterday, I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine, an Indigenous leader, and I was very frustrated with the conversation I had with industry. And you know, the way that it was mentored to me is that, you know, when you're talking to instantiated capitalist colonial powers, you can't talk to them about rights because they don't care about rights. What they care about are risks. And if you tell them what the risks are in their language, that's the greatest way to appeal to them to make change.
Thank you so much, Jess.
Can I do two?
Of course.
First one, support Danny and Food Tank. She's amazing. She doesn't get enough credit for everything she does.
Thanks.
It's insane how much work Danny
And Bernie and Elena and Kenzie.
the entire Food Tank team, and it's really incredible. But
Thank
second,
you.
this was not the topic of this talk, but vote. Do everything you can for whoever you want to vote for. I'm assuming this group leans a certain way, but we got 2 months. This is one of the most important elections. It really matters for the climate agenda. It really matters for food systems. This is going to be one of the most important elections in U.S. history. Everyone get out there and start doing your part, whether it's donating, advocacy. It's the big thing that is hovering over all of these conversations this week. So that's my call to action.
Thank you. Let's protect democracy, everyone. Thank you, Jess Fanzo. Thank you, John. Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Christine. Thank you. I love you. Thank you. So another round of applause as they exit, please. Those are incredible thinkers and doers. I am so excited for this next fireside chat, and I'd like to introduce Dr. David Laborde, the Agri-Food Economics and Policy Division Director at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Round of applause. Nice to see you, David. And I get to introduce Richard Zaltzman, the CEO of EIT Food. Round of applause. Nice to see you. So, this is really a question for you both because so much has been going on this week. What have you seen and heard so far that, thank you for the shh, everyone quiet down. What have you both seen and heard so far, again, that makes you inspired or pisses you off?
Wow, that's a big question. Bang, straight in. Let's start with the inspired. I think first of all, just the sheer number of people having the right conversations.
Yeah.
So the work you're doing here at Food Tank, Regen House, some of the corporate events, there is a real desire to be involved in the conversations we absolutely need to have.
Yeah.
And I think this is my first climate week. We're kind of building on the COP feeling. It feels there's more purpose in that attendance.
Nice.
Kind of pisses me off. I suppose just the lack of understanding of what some of this food system transition might take, especially, sorry to any bankers in the room, especially in the finance side, that there's this idea you switch it on like pumping VC money into a tech startup and bang, it'll all change. And you've got to really understand the dynamics in food systems.
I love that point. Listen up, bankers. David.
So on the good side, I think that we have very diversity of actors talking with each other and having the difficult discussion. And so far, a lot of the problem we had in the agri-food system world is these silos, and now we are starting to break them. Now people are talking with each other, but not exactly with the same language.
Right.
So that's a bit of problem, and we are still in a world where people try to oversimplify many stories, always saying the good, the bad, when we really have a continuum of solution, a continuum of factors, and oversimplification is not going to help us, even if it makes the story more attractive for some people.
Right. That's such a valuable point that we all need to be using different vocabulary, different semantics. We are not speaking the same language, and you're right, you do have a tendency to oversimplify if you're not. How do we break out of that, do you think?
For us, in particular at FAO, we like data, we like numbers. At least people can speak this universal language. A number is a number. After you can interpret it differently, but a starting point. Going back to fact, going back to evidence.
Science.
We're not here to discuss opinions.
Right.
We agree on the fact, and from there we design the solutions. And for us, that's a key starting point.
Excellent. Thank you. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I suppose as well as the facts and the data, it's that understanding of the voices that really matter, and the farmer's voice and the people who put everything on the line in the food system is woefully underrepresented. You know, I'm not a farmer, and I'm acutely conscious of how many cock-ups I make when I make assumptions about what life will be like if we do certain things. So that understanding of data is absolutely critical, as is, especially from the corporate perspective, really putting aside your own corporate ego and understanding what does it take to put a family farm on the line if you're really asking for change.
Right. Excellent points. This is for both of you, and this is not, I'm not talking about the people in this room, obviously, but for many people, who are not seeing or ignoring the effects of climate change every day, they think it's something that's far in the future. And then there are, of course, still people who deny that the climate crisis is happening. Do you think that we can communicate effectively that we are in an emergency, and because it's an emergency, we need to do something about it?
I think so. And that's where the two sides of the farmers and the data come together. Ask a farmer, they will tell you that climate change is a reality. It's not the next generation. It's now, and they are on the front line. Now, as it has been said, they are a bit underrepresented in New York this time, and sometimes people blame them. Okay.
Right.
Farmers are killing the planet. No, they are not killing the planet. They are feeding us. And it's already challenging. And as of today, we have, of course, the climate crisis, but we are still in a food security and nutrition crisis. We have 733 million people that are in chronic hunger. 1 person over 11 go in a regular manner hungry when go to bed. 2.3 billion people are food insecure. 2.8 billion cannot afford a healthy diet. And so we have to tackle these two crises at the same time.
Yeah.
And not blaming the farmers, but
I
finding
love
a solution for them.
Absolutely. Richard?
Anyone on the front line feels climate change day in, day out. And I remember recently I asked a potato farmer, like, what's the increase in incidence of crop failure for your potatoes? And she said, look, actually we look at it a different way around. We look at how often are we successful. So we used to have a crop that allowed us to make a profit maybe every 3, possibly 4 years. So we'd have an investment cycle, we'd buy the new kit, we'd tidy up the farm every 3 or 4 years. Now it's every 5 to 7 years. So, farmers and others in the sector are on the front line. The bit where it's very still immaterial, I think, is in spaces where people are, again, making assumptions and it's not being felt. And that's where, I don't know, personal view is the scaremongering isn't working.
Right.
So if you look at again, take a boardroom, right? There are probably no people in that boardroom. Maybe I'm making a gross generalization, but I doubt any people in a boardroom in New York have gone a day without a meal. And I myself, I've not had a day without a meal because I couldn't afford one or find one.
Right.
So that it's very immaterial to some of the people who are in decision-making spaces.
Yeah.
The conversation I would love to have, given that fear-mongering doesn't seem to work, is one about legacy. And I think you touched on this earlier in the week, and at the dinner the other night. What's the story you want to have with your kids and your grandkids? You're a leader in a flagship organization or not, doesn't really matter how big you are, but at the end of it all, as you look back on it, what are you going to be proud of, and what are you going to regret, and what are your kids or friends or family or the history books going to make of you? I think that maybe that's an angle that actually triggers people to think, I'm going to be a lot ballsier with my shareholders. I'm going to tell them this is going to go down before it goes up.
Yeah.
And there are great examples of that in different spaces, but it's not pervasive enough.
No, it is not pervasive enough, and we do have to flip the story. I'm wondering, when we talk about climate solutions, we talk about both mitigation and adaptation, but I'm wondering if you can both talk about how far adaptation can really take us.
So, first in agriculture, sometimes the solutions are going to deliver benefits on both. So that's part of the silo. No, it's not adaptation on one side and mitigation on the other. We can deliver on both. Now, we are not going to adapt at a 3 degree or 4 degrees Celsius increase in temperature, at least not everyone. And I think that's very important, is the question of fairness and inequalities.
Sure.
Rich people, high-income countries will be able to mobilize finance technology to adapt their agri-food system. And moreover, they are not in the tropical area when a lot of the low and middle income countries are in the tropical area, they are going to be hurt heavily. They are already hurt heavily, and they will not have the capacity. So that's why we really need to keep the agenda on both sides alive.
Yeah.
Without adaptation, we will not get food security and nutrition. And if we don't do more on mitigation, we will never be able to adapt at the scale we are.
Well said. Thank you.
Yeah, there is adaptation is non-linear. It's going to top out. As does something like carbon. Again, there's so many parallels here. I had a lot of conversations with companies about carbon banking in farming. So you talk to them and you realize suddenly there's this assumption that it's going to be continued linear at least growth, if not nice exponential growth, like a stock price. You sit them down and say, have you ever actually dug into the ground and lifted it up? It's not just dark black carbon. It's a mineral mix, right? So we're not, this idea of linear response is very misleading.
Yeah.
Adaptation is going to top out. It may be time to consider what some are thinking about as extreme mitigation, things like geoengineering, when you look at the potential for hundreds of millions of people to be displaced if you don't start taking radical measures in some places. So I think the assumption that we can change the farming system and adapt, as well as have a positive impact on mitigation, it's one that, what does that look like in a non-linear system? That's very poorly understood at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about culture, because when we talk about, the climate crisis, we often, assume, and these conversations come up, that we have to change our diets, that is the key part of this. And we want to nourish people. We want to eat foods that are better for us and the planet. But this is going to look very different in different regions of the world. And David, I'm hoping you can take this on first, because that culture, food is so significant to everyone, for so many reasons. But there's, so many cultural reasons for, eating different kinds of food. And when we tell people, hey, you have to stop eating red meat, or you have to stop eating fish, or whatever, we're telling them, from one week to another, that can look very different. Can you talk about why culture is important?
Yes, food brings us together. There's a strong cultural aspect. There's religious aspect. It's part of all the family and all the community. But also, food nourishes us. So we want a healthy diet, a balanced diet. And today in the world, we are in a situation where, yes, you have some countries and some people that are over-consuming meat, but you have also a lot of people that are actually don't have enough micronutrients. And if you're in Africa today, the best way to get micronutrients to kids is with milk, is with eggs, is with meat. Maybe in 35 years, they will get 45 cereals at breakfast, but not today.
Yeah.
And we cannot let kids malnourish. So really, we have to basically manage over the next 25 years this rebalancing, and we need to engage with everyone. And the goal is not to say, stop eating that,
right,
but more start to eat in a more reasonable manner, in a more healthy manner. It's good for you, and in many cases, it can be good for the planet. But we should not go to extreme.
Right, I like the rebalancing. Richard?
Yeah, we often seem to view tradition as immutable. And there's a view that there are certain things that have never changed, and we've always had the ability to, the beef on the table on Sundays, for example. And it actually, when we look at it, many things are changing, especially with a new generation of people coming through who are a lot more aware. And so there is an underlying constant change in the cultural dynamic, which is very much not reflected in the political assumption that there are these immutable truths there. I mean, David's point on the nutrition is so important, and also there is a view, I think, that people will want. There are enough people who will want to do the right thing. Ultimately, they will want to make a positive change for themselves, whether it's for sustainability, whether it's for their own health. If we can badge that again, less as fear-mongering, less as we're all going to die if you eat another slice of beef, and more as a positive change, leave a little impact step by step. And I think, especially in the developed Western rich world, that's probably a better narrative. The most important challenge is elsewhere, to be honest.
Yeah. This is for you both, but David, when we last spoke, we talked about there's a lot of infighting in food and agriculture movements, right? There's a lack of civility. Is the arguments that we're having about the right path and the right words to use keeping us back? And how, if it is keeping us back, how can we get out of that sort of trajectory?
So there is not the right path. There is not the silver bullet that will solve everything. When people say, I have the solution, I start to get very nervous because it means that the other didn't have, and especially more in someone that I've never been on a farm. That's a bit sometimes what's happening.
Right on.
So, so that's where I think we need to contextualize this solution, and we need to respect the different people. Large corporations, smallholders, they don't wake up saying we are going to make people sick or are going to destroy the planet. They all try to do their business, basically, and small farmers are businessmen. It's a very difficult job. They have to do accounting, they have to do biology, they have to produce, they have to sell, so we have to respect them. So I think that, yes, we have to stop with ideology. That's more easy to say than to do. But at the end, what is at stake is what we put in our plate, the food, for us, for the kids, but also that, we have one planet. And we are going to be 10 billion on this planet. And it's not, maybe 8 million people in New York that will drive the narrative. And so we have to listen to these different voices all around the place to find this diversity of solution. I really think that, and that's good risk management, You don't put all your eggs in the same basket. And that's the same thing for solution.
I love it. Diversity of solutions, diversity of thought, diversity of practices. We need all of those things. Richard?
Just also thinking about building momentum rather than hitting the perfect direction. I mean, we're a Google Maps world now. So to get down here, I knew precisely how many steps I would have to take pretty much from the subway to here. Now, this change isn't like that. When we first started having the conversations with large global companies about regen ag, they were saying, okay, you're going to run a pilot. Precisely how many tons of carbon am I going to be able to attribute to that first crop in 3 years' time? Okay, but you really don't get this, do you? This is a case of building momentum. We know at the moment we've got a 360-degree compass. We're agreeing we need to go north. So let's just start moving north, and we will refine our journey as we go. And that mindset, I see some great companies who are doing this now. And am I allowed to call out individual companies?
Of course.
General Mills, big US company, maybe not everybody's friend, but they at the highest level have said we're going to move away from attribution of value, i.e. carbon counting, to contribution to impact. So they've backed off all of their carbon targets in Regen Ag and just said we're going to focus on contribution to impact. And that to me was really powerful when I first heard that from a company that size, albeit they're privately owned, so I think that helps. So this idea of move to contribution to impact collectively and think about direction and momentum rather than exactly how much carbon am I going to claim in my CSRD is a really valuable mindset shift.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. So I've ended every panel, I think, today. It's hard to remember with the call to action, but I think for the both of you, it's really important because you're such leaders in different ways. So Richard, what's your call to action to this audience and the people listening online? And thank you, listeners online.
Probably just come back to the momentum thing. It's really, as humans, we're trained right from primary school to try to be right. What's the right answer to this? The test, the maths, the science. It's all about being right and holding back until you are right. Forget that. We're not going to be right. We're going to be mostly wrong, but directionally appropriate. So just think personally, what can I do just to move in the right direction and build that coalition of movement in the right direction? And I think we'll start to feel we're going in the right direction together. And it's a very different feeling.
I love that. Directionally appropriate. I'll try to be that. David, last word.
No, exactly on that. And small progresses every year is much better than the big revolution or the big jump in 10 or 15 years. Because we cannot wait 15 years.
Right.
We cannot continue to emit the same amount of carbon, or we cannot have kids that doesn't have good food every day because they will pay the price of their life. So we do this, and we also all have to accept that we will never get what we want. We have to make compromises, and we just want to have something we can live with. And if at the end we are all a bit upset, that's already good.
Yeah.
If we agree on moving together.
And we need something we can live with, literally. Thank you, David. Thank you so much. Thank you, Richard. Give them a round of applause. What a fun conversation. Thank you both. So I'm kind of jealous that I don't get to moderate the next panel, but Brian Walsh, he's great. He's the editorial director at Vox. I'll introduce him in a second, but he's going to talk with a group of young folks, this next generation who is driving food systems transformation. So Brian Walsh, again, is the editorial director at Vox. He's an incredible journalist. Joining him, we have Nika Moaney, the founder and executive director of Youth Climate Save Canada. I'm sorry, I butchered your last name. Gareth Granswall, the co-executive director of Regeneration. Naveen Derberkula, I am sorry again, the co-founder and executive director of Food for Thought and an undergraduate student at Harvard, and Erica Cavillo Ramirez, who is a climate justice and food systems advocate and youth ambassador of the Plant-Based Treaty. And I'm getting up. Thank you all. Round of applause. Nice to see you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you all so much. So much great to be here talking to the next generation. Before I was here, I was actually at home with my 7-year-old son, who this morning at PS 58 in Carroll Gardens did a climate march with him and all his classmates. And if you really want to be like inspired, go see a lot of 7-year-olds very excited about climate change, very excited about the future. So that's like the next generation. We're here to talk about the next generation, I think, right now. I want to start, Sanani, maybe you could start a little bit by telling the audience a little about your journey with Legado Gaia, your organization, and how this connects to the kind of work we're doing here.
Yes, thank you so much all for being here. I'm from Mexico, from the Anguilla community, and I'm part of Legado Gaia, which is a youth organization that is based in Mexico, but also will work in Latin America and our territories. So in there, what we try to do is harness climate hope to sow the land in the way that our ancestors did, and also to bring all this ancient wisdom to the current food system through the work of youth, through the work of indigenous youth as well. So yeah, this is something that we believe is so important for the crisis that we live in right now, because like the solutions are already within our community, so what we need is only support to like bring them out there.
Absolutely. Naveen, I'll go to you next. Still a student, which is amazing, and you're here. Introduce yourself a little bit and share the vision behind Food for Thought, which is the group you work with in the development of food hubs, I think, in most cities, in major cities.
Sure. So first of all, it's a pleasure to be here speaking to you all. My name is Naveen. I'm currently a senior at Harvard University with a custom degree in sustainable food systems. Going into school, I struggled a bit with finding people who were passionate about the same things as me. I went in with a very clear purpose of trying to build a better food system. But when I got to school, I found that there was a lack of resources and opportunities to pursue careers in that area. And I didn't even know what a career in building a better food system could look like. So that's when I had the idea to start Food for Thought Innovations. And our goal is basically to be a hub that connects students with careers in the food system, companies, NGOs, various other stakeholders, and activate students in the present moment to be change makers, demonstrating that there is the capability to make small changes in your life at this very moment, even if you feel like changing the food system is such an intractable problem. So our big focus is building international bridges, in particular between students in the United States and students in a lot of other countries who are working on various food issues. And I think the power of connecting with people from different cultures, from different experiences, is super valuable for all of us. So building those bridges between students in the United States and the hubs we're starting in Brazil, China, and India this year is going to be really helpful and productive for all of us to just learn from each other and figure out how we can work together to build a better food system.
Gareth, over to you. Can you give us an overview of Regeneration and that mission you have there?
Sure, thank you. It's so great to be here with all of you. My name is Gareth Gransell. I'm the co-executive director and co-founder of Regeneration, which is a youth movement training the next generation of leaders to rethink how the economy can serve human and ecological well-being. And the name that we have is very intentionally about embedding regenerative values. We used to be called the Business Youth Council for Sustainable Development back when Nico was a volunteer with us a while ago, which is a name that nobody could remember. And we wanted to rebrand to really both position youth as the generation that will be rethinking sustainability, but also embedding regenerative values at the center. And for us, what that really means is centering the conversations in systems change and deconstructing power and really using a justice lens. And so one of our first ever campaigns was a manifesto to change business education, particularly because as a group of business students, business education is where a lot of problematic ideas about the role of business in society get replicated, including shareholder primacy and the idea that the food system should only be organized around profit. And so we exist to sort of change that systemically and think, how could we re-envision the food system if it wasn't only about profit. We also have a large web platform that exists to help youth get involved, get informed, and get a job in 7 sectors of the clean economy, including sustainable food, but also clean energy, impact investing, circular economy, and many other sectors. And we also use storytelling as a way to inspire people about the future of their careers. And so the first documentary that we released in this regard is actually called Roots of Change, and it's about the sustainable food movement, and we profile organizations that are leading the way towards a more localized and more sustainable food system.
And Nika, can you tell us about Youth Climate Save Canada and just in general the role youth play in big international spaces like COP, for instance?
Awesome. Thank you so much. So hi, everybody. Thanks for being here on the last day of Climate Week. So a bit about myself. My name is Nika, and I started Youth Climate Save Canada back in 2021. My background's in policy, so I studied, I got a master's in international affairs from Carleton University, and I was working in the Canadian government on policy issues. And when I found Youth Climate Save, it actually was started in the US by a young climate activist named Genesis Butler, and she was doing some great work there with younger youth. So the youth we work with are 14 all the way to 30. And I saw what she was doing, and I told her I really want to start that in Canada. So it started in that way, and I wanted to use my background in policy and government to create impact at the intersection of food and climate issues. So Youth Climate Save focuses on everything from food waste to the transition to more plant-rich diets. And we really look at it from what type of policies and systems need to shift in order for that to happen. And there's a lot of youth that are educated and interested in that aspect of activism and advocacy. And so some of the work that we've done with Youth Climate Save is we actually emailed every Canadian member of parliament. So Gareth and I are actually both Canadian. So we work a bit more in the Canadian context. And so Youth Climate Save met with over 20 members of parliament to talk about how we need to operationalize Canada's food guide. So Canada's food guide is quite a plant-forward food guide and quite healthy, and we wanted to see this kind of shift in public institutions that are at a federal level. And so we met with a lot of them, and we basically really work as part of the Canadian Climate Action Network, of which we're a member, and along with other coalitions like the Coalition for Healthy School Food, the Coalition for Sustainable Food Transition, in order to bring that youth voice in. And to answer your question about COP, so I had a chance to go to COP 28. It was my first COP, and this year I'm going to Azerbaijan, so if you're going, let me know, and we can think about what we can do there, right, to bring the youth voice and bring the food system's voice. So I think it's really important for youth like us to have access to spaces like COP so that we can hold leaders accountable to the promises they're making, so that we can join official organizations like Youngo, which is a youth constituency of the UNFCCC, and in those spaces have a way to influence the kind of declarations that are coming out. So that's from youth influencing the public sector, but youth also need to hold the businesses that are coming to COP accountable. So I really make a point to go and interact also with the private sector and agribusiness and various other organizations and private institutions that come to COP, so that we can again hold them accountable to how they are measuring their impact and how they are making these promises to become carbon neutral and climate friendly, et cetera. And I think youth are the ones that are really ambitious and progressive in being able to hold them accountable. So that's why I think it's important for us to have access to the spaces.
Great. This is just to open it up to the whole panel here. I mean, the COP sort of opens up one area here which I wonder about, which is, you know, a lot of you focus on, I would say, like grassroots movements or thinking about community-based solutions. Obviously, at the same time, climate change is quite literally a global issue. I mean, how do you balance that local action might be taken with the need to push for or be involved in, I guess, more global systemic change? If anyone wants to jump on that first.
I think it's very important for also the youth climate movements to harness like the attention and resources that it has already to like bring it to the communities that are experiencing not only the worst effects of the climate change, but that are the ones that have the solutions for it. Because I know that sometimes what happens here is that we all talk about the global issues and about what we can do in policy, but we forget what is happening right now in our territories. So I believe that it's really important not only to include people at these spaces, but like to actually make them engaged in how this system is being shaped and how we can then create a better one. Because I believe that something that I have learned also from my ancestors is that when we can, when we want to heal the earth, we have to heal ourselves, and for that we have to heal our relationships with others. So like being really able against and really stand against all the oppositions on and all the oppressions that this system sometimes creates. So yeah, that is what I believe, that we can then create an horizontal perspective to how we create policy and how we create these spaces as well.
Certainly.
I can touch on
Go
that.
ahead, please.
So food is such a regional issue, and it's so different based on different regions of the world and based on the different backgrounds of the farmers and organizations. And so it's important for youth from the global south and the global north to go to places like COP and engage in policy, because we each come from different perspectives of what's happening locally. So I think we need to take action locally and change the systems and policies and work that's happening on the ground, but then we need to bring that to the global audience. And I bring a interesting perspective to this because I'm originally from Iran, so I think a lot about the intersections of that, and being from the Middle East and thinking about food systems there and geopolitics there, and then from Canada as well. And I just want to add that yeah, I think it's important for both the global north and south to come to places to really talk about how we're going to fix this together, and also to reflect on the inequities of what has transpired with colonialism and who really should be the ones paying for things like climate finance. I think it's really important for all those voices to be at the table and to hear each other, and we can't just be just in our own little spaces. We need to come back out and look at our responsibility to the global south, as speaking as someone from the global north. So I think it's important for us to focus locally, but then come to these spaces where we can meet people from other parts of the world.
I'll go, I guess. So I think for me, grassroots and local action is so important because I think the best way that you can really influence others is by directly connecting with them, and especially as youth and the platform that we have on this stage today, but then also in general through social media, through the networks that we exist in, universities, schools, where we have access to so many other students who are open and curious to learning. I think that's where we really do the groundwork of building relationships with people, understanding what people care about, what they're passionate about, and how we can work together to align our interests with what we need to focus on, which is a sustainable, equitable, and accessible future for everyone. I think that's all super important, but at the same time, at the systemic level, that is where we see change happening most widely. It is slow at times, it's inefficient at times, but I do think that having representation from youth, especially in those spaces, like Shananine was saying as well, is going to be so important to ensuring that the people who inherit the future of this planet are represented and are accounted for in policymaking decisions.
Yeah. I would add that it's very much often a question of sort of who is in the room and whose voices are not being heard. And that often is a question of power, particularly when you participate in sort of oftentimes very elite spaces that are focused on and dominated around transforming the industrial agriculture system, often in terms that are very sort of techno-utopian and focused on like productivity and yields and all of these ways that are important, but also sometimes ways of depoliticizing the conversation around food. And the reality is that the industrial food system right now is incredibly inefficient. efficient. And by some estimates, it feeds a minority of the world on 75% of the world's agricultural resources, including water and other inputs. And in reality, there are small-scale farmers that feed the majority of humanity on very little resources. This is the 2.5 billion farmers and fisher folk and pastoralists. And yet, simultaneously, 70% of the people in the world that are chronically food insecure are in the agriculture sector. And a lot of the time, that's not just a fluke, it's by design. It's a structural crisis that's caused by international economic systems that are designed to create export-oriented agriculture, which has often financial consequences for people that have to earn money on international markets but then don't have enough to feed their families. Or, you have subsidized food that is dumped in countries where it basically outcompetes a lot of local production, and that causes dispossession and displacement. And there's also, questions around corporate power that are really important. There are 3 companies that control basically 70% of the global agrochemical market, and this enormous amount of market power allows them to basically control, in many cases, the trajectory of the food system, particularly when it comes to things like, the genetic modification of high-yield crops that come with this whole package of other very expensive inputs that farmers, particularly in the global south, then have to purchase. And so the reality is, unless we center questions about power in the discussion about the future of the food system, we are never going to actually create a better food system that works for people and planet.
Curious, do you see this is for everyone again, your generation of change makers seeing the connection between food and climate change more tightly, I guess, than perhaps older generations? I mean, I've been doing this for longer than I want to say. And used to feel more separate. Now it feels like, this conference I think is a great example of that. I'm just curious, is this something where when you look at your peers, yeah, it's logical that food and climate change are 2 things that have to be intertwined?
Yeah, thank you, sir. Yeah, I think for me, I think for all of you, when we are at a certain time in our life, we believe that we can change the world. And I think that one of the things that in my community is so central is food, because food is the thing that ties us to our territory, the thing that also is reproducing our form of life and our form of thought every day. So I believe that I at least in our organization and also with my colleagues in the territory, we believe that it's through food that we are going to heal ourselves and the world, because it is what our ancestors have also taught us, that how to perceive the land is we can eat from there as well. So also for me, I think that it's very important to talk about the finance aspect and the power relations aspect, as you said, because also that is something that the food system is really involved in to tackle climate change, because also 3,000 million of private investments and 4 million of public investments are going into industrial agriculture and the factory farming business. So also with the coalition that we are part of as the youth organization, the Stop Financing Factory Farming Coalition, we are understanding as well how the food system is being intertwined with the financial aspect of the economy, because it is something as well that is going to tackle a lot what is going to happen in our territories, because a lot of the times it's said that yes, a lot of investments are going to the communities, but at the same time much more is going into the industries that are creating the problem. So it is also disparity in between power but also resources. So I think that through understanding all that is that we are also creating all these solutions and coming here and trying to speak with all of us so that we can then challenge all of this with what we have already learned.
Go ahead, yeah.
So my organization started off creating content to educate people about food and climate change, and I feel like back in 2021 there was a need to do that, but at this point youth are so aware, I feel, and it makes me really happy. The group Naveen works on, and other groups like Plant Futures is a youth-run university chapter-led organization that helps youth prepare for careers in the plant-based sector. Yesterday, or a few days ago, I was at an institute called Regen House that's part of Climate Week, and a group of 3 youth aged 20 to 22 from New York City created a group called Y Regenerative, and they brought together like the head of the regenerative organic certification and the alliances and farmers, and they really hosted a really excellent event. And I was so impressed that my generation is so aware of this issue, and not only are they aware, they're actually taking action. And I think something I love about youth is that we're not afraid of the power imbalances. Like Gareth is every day, challenging different policies. He's challenging different power imbalances. Naveen every day is like working with youth directly in his school, and Zenanine as well is working with Indigenous youth. And I feel like we see that our peers care about this topic, and they're even open to changing their behavior. And an example of that is at the Nest Climate Campus on Tuesday, there was a panel about institutional food procurement, and they were talking about university cafeterias and how in university cafeterias they're doing planet-friendly foods. There is a man in the audience here, Sid, who used to work at Simon Fraser University, and he did a lot of great work on bringing climate into the cafeteria, right where youth are exposed every single day to their food choices. And so I feel like youth are really open. When these things happen, youth aren't opposing it. They're not like, bring my hamburger back. They're like, no, like we are open, we're interested. And it's also though about preserving choice. I'm not saying that all youth want to go plant-based. There's definitely a role for regenerative agriculture as well, and we really need to all be at the table. And I think youth are realizing this more and more, is that that stereotype of like very angry youth that are just opposing things is kind of dissipating, and you see us coming to the table with the people we disagree with, and we're really sitting and having these in-depth conversations, and we're really trying to bring our voice in. So I think youth really do care, and I feel really hopeful about that. And even the youth that might be unaware of these issues are constantly getting exposed to it, whether it's at school or with their other friends or in other networks.
Absolutely. With a little bit of time left, I want to ask sort of a question for everyone here, which is, let's leave with a call to action. In this case, like, for older generations like mine, before we pass into obsolescence, like, how can we actually help? Like, how can we be allies, I suppose, to what your generation's trying to do? Just each of you really quickly with you.
Yeah, I believe that one of the greatest powers that also the older generation holds is to transmit knowledge and to also be able to have these dialogues, because I believe that the world already is going through a lot, but to also have this historical perspective of how things have changed already in the past is very important for us to have also that trust on transformative change as well, that is going to keep in a cycle as time itself.
Okay. Naveen?
Yeah, I just want to, first of all, quickly talk a little bit about the youth awareness aspect, because I think this ties into my call to action. But I would say that I think there's a lot of awareness amongst youth about these issues and the relationships, but I don't think that that necessarily translates into action. So one of the things that our organization focuses on is this intent and to action gap. Basically, how do you actually get people to take the next steps to actually pursue careers in the food system, to actually act and make change in their lives at this very moment in time? So I think one thing that I'd ask for all of the potentially older generations in the audience is to serve as role models, because people who are in our generation look up and say, what could my future look like? What could a career look like for me? And I think having these role models that are trailblazing change in the food system and are doing it in a very impactful and inspiring way is super duper important. And the second thing I'd say is talk to youth, talk to us, please, after this event, and get engaged and connect, because I think it's important to build these bridges between generations.
Absolutely. Gareth?
Yeah, I would say for me, it's often been people thinking that I don't have enough knowledge, or that I'm naive, or that I don't understand systems and all this stuff. And I testified at the House of Commons in Canada on Monday about the financial system and its impacts on the climate. And it was the same old story, like, you don't understand economics, finance, whatever. And then I spoke, and then they were like, you're an ESG consultant profiting off the destruction of the oil industry. And I was like, what are you talking about? But anyways, I think it's important to know that, like, we're here, we've done a research, we know what we're talking about, and we're still ambitious anyways, and we still have these bold ideas about the future, and so it's not for a lack of understanding, it's just the urgency of the crisis that demands bolder change.
Absolutely. Nikki, get the last word. Good.
I'm so proud of you guys. Okay. Consult youth. And what I mean by this is, let's say you're in government and a regulator. When you're thinking about the groups you're consulting on your proposed regulation, you're thinking of industry, you're thinking of NGOs, you're thinking of indigenous communities, and you forget that youth are also a group that you should consult. And that's really the change that I want to see as someone that used to work in government is regulations and policies really need to have youth as a consultation group. And let's say you're not that and you work in the private sector, I think you still should try to bring in a youth arm or a youth testing group or something just to get youth feedback and perspectives. And I think that's a tangible thing that you can actually do in your own institutions.
Absolutely. Well, I feel better about the future than I did 25 minutes ago. Thank you all to the panel, and thank you to Food Stamps as well.
Fantastic panel. So takeaways, listen to youth, consult youth, meet youth. I think those are all great suggestions for us all. I do feel super old now, but feel also super inspired. So thanks, everyone. I'm moving, Ricardo. I'm sorry. Round of applause again for that panel, please. And thanks to Brian Walsh, who again is an excellent journalist. I hope you seek him out on Vox. His writing is incredible. I am so looking forward to this next panel. I get to sit with friends, honestly. And so joining me for this conversation, hey, everyone quiet down. Thank you. Joining me for this conversation, we have Maren Doles, the managing partner of Now Partners and the co-founder of the Future Economy Forum. Round of applause, please. Philip Tevereau, the co-founder and CEO of Yolele. Round of applause. Bigger, everyone. Come on, keep your energy up. It's the last day of Climate Week. Julia Collins, the founder of Planet Forward. Round of applause. And Rihanna Lynn, the founder of Journey Foods. Thank you. How's everyone doing?
Good.
Did you survive this week?
Yeah.
Everyone looks
Surviving.
good. Everyone looks good and bright and shiny.
We made it.
I'm so pleased to see you all here. Thank you so much. So Julia and Rihanna, I'd like to start with you because you're my favorites. You're both working to leverage technology and gather data on our food and agriculture systems. I'd love to hear from you both what is missing and why is it important that there are things missing? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Well, can I first say I just wanted to say that I'm so proud of you for doing this in and out every day, every week, every year. And this is like my 10th event speaking, and just thank you for always putting Journey Foods in my cell phone. So I wanted to say I appreciate that. Thank you for this work. What's missing? There's so much missing, and I think that at Journey Foods we're really trying to collect that through global data that supports a system that is quite young when we think about food and agriculture around the world. Right, modern food science is about 80 years old. Global supply chains are just a little bit older than that.
Yeah.
And we get a lot of things wrong every single day trying to feed 8 billion people. And we focus on packaged processed foods. Unfortunately, they're more than 60% of like the global daily diet. And we think it's really important. And I think it's really important that we map out nutrition sustainability and cost data. And the reason why we chose that was because a lot of companies try to get things right. They try to improve and want to improve sustainability metrics. They want to improve the nutrition and things that go into our bodies. But it's really hard to make those changes without actionable data and cost data and thinking about the bottom line. And so we've aligned and brought AI into the modern processes of food science and supply chain decision making, and happy to go into that more. But for us, we just think that a lot of the global South data is missing when it comes to nutrition and sustainability metrics, and a lot of cost data is missing for a lot of these same things. And I'm happy to continue these conversations where I learn every single day where we can bring on more data to the Journey Foods platform. And I think these opportunities are really key to that.
Yeah, actionable data. I love it.
Yeah.
Julia.
I think that's really well said, Rihanna, and I like that the question is about what's missing. Because, sometimes you turn up at Climate Week and it can feel a little bit like a best in show for every organization that wants to tell you everything that's gone right and everything that they're doing. But if it were all going right and we were all doing everything that we were supposed to be doing, we wouldn't be here. I don't actually want to come to Climate Week again next year and hear more about everything that everyone's doing that's good.
Right.
We need points of inspiration, that's fine. But there are things that are missing, and one of the things that's missing in my world, which is very much about gathering high-quality data on Scope 3 emissions to help companies decarbonize the 90% or more of their emissions that are coming from their value chain, is collaboration between brands and retailers and food service companies and their upstream suppliers. So this is a call to collaboration for anyone in the audience that wants to join something called the Aligned Reporting Initiative. Planet Forward and the Climate Collaborative and Sensiba and many retail partners are aligning around a way to ask questions of upstream suppliers that is aligned and that's not so burdensome. And so that's an example of me making a specific request for collaboration, and I think that's also a little bit of what's missing.
It's so helpful. So again, Aligned Reporting Initiative, look it up, get in touch with Julia. It's great that collaboration is happening. Can you talk a little bit more about why aligned data and this actionable data is so important to the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, in order to go from sort of setting a net zero target to actually making progress on a decarbonization goal, you have to understand what's driving your emissions. You have to know everything from your head office down to a head of lettuce in the fields, which means that at some point you have to gather primary data from your upstream suppliers. You can't just rely on global average emissions data. That's good enough to get a start, but it's not good enough to make progress.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's so important that we're collaborating and getting that primary data into the places where it can really drive decarbonization strategy.
It's great. And collaboration is the most I've heard regenerative the 1,000 times that John De La Parra did too, but I've heard collaboration so much more this year than any other year. So that's something that's positive that I think will move us forward. Philip, if I can turn to you, I had the honor of talking to Kerry Fowler yesterday, and you and he have a great concern about crops that have often been sort of left behind, underutilized crops, or as Dr. Fowler calls them, opportunity crops. And I'm wondering if you can talk about these crops that are sort of thought of as poor people's crops, that are so resilient to the climate crisis, so resilient to pests and disease, but a lot of people except Yolele have just not paid attention to.
Well, there are a lot of these, and I think largely because of yield. So much of the world's attention has focused on crops that have benefited from the attention of generations and generations of breeding and improvement. You look back thousands of years and wheat, maize, rice didn't look like they do now. There are still so many of these crops that have not benefited from that improvement, but that are resilient to climate change and that can feed a changing world and the people who inhabit it, and that require some attention, whether it's in terms of improvement and, in our view, in terms of processing and attention to agronomic improvement so that the yield can improve even without the benefit of breeding, generations of breeding.
And that processing point is really important because, we can talk about more nutrient dense and nutritious foods all day long, but they really need to taste good. And the processing that you and Pierre have developed really helps that taste and sort of the flavor of all the things that you're creating.
Well, most importantly, it can make those crops viable ingredients for industry, because for large industry to use what we call an underutilized or opportunity crop, there are risks, and large industry is averse to risk. In order to de-risk that, we are introducing processing capacity that can reduce the post-harvest losses, increase the availability, and process at scale, and reduce the price as well, because a lot of the background behind why some of these underutilized crops are underutilized has to do with their cost, and a lot of that has to do with inefficient processing. Yeah. And we need to introduce efficient processing to these crops.
Can you just briefly call out some of these crops, like your favorites?
Yeah, thank you for reminding me. So we focus on fonio, which is grown, has a lot of virtues. It's drought tolerant, pretty densely nutritious, and it's a grain, can be used like any other grain in all kinds of foods or beverages, and supports livelihoods for mainly women who are growing this crop to feed their families. And it's not really a cash crop, but it can be a cash crop if the right attention is devoted
it's
to it.
It's delicious too. It's easy to cook. It's delicious. Everyone go buy some Yolele Fonio after this. Go to Whole Foods. Go to your local cooperative. I'm your biggest champion.
It's a gluten-free grain that cooks in 5 minutes.
Awesome. It's awesome. Thank you, Philip. Marion, we've talked about how yields have been emphasized for so long, sort of throughout these conversations. Shakuntala mentioned it earlier. But that has meant a really narrow focus for our food system. And I said this earlier, we've been good at filling people up. We're not good at really nourishing them. Can you talk about that?
Sure. I mean, some of the things that we just talked about what's missing, what are the crops that we're relying on. I honestly think that there are two main things that are missing. One is our system literacy, our ability to understand and actually see systems. And we still think that the world is a big, giant machine, a little bit in those beautiful, like Darwinian drawings of animals that are made of cogs and wheels. And in that world, you want to be centralized. In that world, you want something that is able to produce one factory that produces all the, let's say, yogurts for the entire country. But that comes with a lot of challenges and problems because now you're over-engineering it, you're shipping it for long distances, but also you need quantities of those same ingredients in that region. And in that sense, for me, what is missing is a transition towards a more distributed system. And if I'm really honest, this week has been mainly a major frustration. Mm-hmm. Because the past climate weeks, because I've been coming at these for way too long, the past climate weeks, people on stage were at least trying to defend that they didn't have to change. Now everybody's moved beyond that point and has understood that they can't stop ignoring it. So therefore, we're getting these cute little iconic stories of how we have met the farmer, how we have changed this little brand, but they represent 0.1%, 0.2% of revenue of a company because it's still not moving into the heart of the business because there's still this conviction that there's a dichotomy between impact socially and ecologically and between business success. And so in my opinion also with that, we're not only missing on one hand side the ability to understand that this needs to move towards a distributed food system, but we are also missing better stories. We are missing the stories that actually solving the climate crisis and solving the social inequality doesn't need a polar bear. It is simply better business. It is something that actually can be driven by the CFO. And if you look at companies like, for example, Natura in the cosmetics industry, then they are not only the world's fourth biggest beauty group, but they're actually also the biggest conservation agency in Brazil, because they protect 2 million hectares of land simply by providing an economy to the indigenous peoples that makes those forests worth more standing up than when you chop them down. Yeah. And in their sales model, provide 800,000 jobs to marginalized women. So for me, those are the things that are still missing, and I wish we didn't have to come in a year after having gone through the circus again. I think we will, and I think then we need to hear better stories.
Yeah, we need to hear better stories. I think frustration is good, but I want to ask you all as people who work in business people, helping business, is it better business that's going to solve this? Julia, I look to you.
Yeah. Is the question whether or not there's a business case for sustainability? And the answer is there absolutely is. And I'll give you an example. One of our customers in New York is Just Salad. I hope many of you have enjoyed this amazing company, right? We work with them to be the first in the industry to put carbon labels on their products, really giving consumers the opportunity to choose food that was aligned with their values. We work with them to identify opportunities to reduce ingredients. This helped us to recommend Simply. I hope you've all had a chance to hear the amazing Sorella from Simply speak this week. And we showed them that regenerative and organic certified quinoa could be swapped out for conventional quinoa and reduce the emissions for that product by 200%. They were be able to preserve the cost of the dish. They were able to get 126% same-store sales increase, which is hard to do as a salad company in New York City.
Right.
And so there is always a business case for sustainability, but you have to be willing to have the conversation.
And you have to be willing to do this really hard, difficult work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rihanna?
I think there's a lot of hard, difficult work and a lot of hard conversations to have and honesty to present. But one thing that I've been really thinking about is like the optimism of really sitting back and thinking, you know, like, what if we get this right? What if we are really imaginative? What if we're really creative with what we do? Being and running an AI company, we have to think about, and I think about the fact that there are so many systems that we were using just 2 years ago that are so much better today.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, what if we come together and think about the folks that are and can think and curate teams that care about ethical AI, for example, folks that curate really well, like your team. And I think that we have the actors and the players that are really passionate. I think we still need to diversify some of those solutions a little bit more. But I do think that we have to imagine that in the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be smarter solutions than ever.
Yeah.
We kind of just have to be creative in how we think about it and who really leads those sort of business efforts.
Such a hopeful message. Thank you for that. That gives me a lot of oomph to get through this. Philip, you know, Rihanna mentioned this, and she said the honesty of your product. Your products are so honest, and I'm wondering if you can talk about how that sort of transparency has benefited you and the whole company.
Well, not enough. But I want to address the last issue that you just raised a little bit here.
Yeah, of course.
There's a tension between, of course, business can generate impact and is key to sustainability, is essential. The participation of business is essential. But there's a tension between the risk of future, the business's future. How is it going to supply itself if something happens with potatoes? If you're a potato chip company, what happens if the ground is too wet and there's no potato crop? Then what do? You have to diversify.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if they're public companies, they are paying attention to quarterly results. And that tension is very real. And I don't know how to address that, but that's systemic.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Mary, do you want to comment on that sort of tension?
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, this is where, for me, the question is about a question of better stories. Because if you look at who invests typically in those major food companies, then they're institutional investors, and it's a very defensive part of an investment fund. And I actually think at the investor level, people would be aligned with diversifying, and through diversifying actually creating more resilience within these businesses, wherefore you can get your year-on-year returns more. However, this all happens within a system, and in that system there are portfolio managers whose own bonuses and whose own actually livelihoods, because when you say bonus, it sounds like something awful. But when you think about livelihoods and you're trying to actually have a living in Greenwich, Connecticut, just up the road from here, then you're kind of dependent on that income to feed your family and to sustain your life, who are misaligned with the incentive to shift that business. Nevertheless, if you look at the data, right now, society is paying 2 to 5x the revenue of food companies in negative externality. So every packet of food that you buy out there that is $1 actually is putting a burden of $2 to $5 on society. And that's little by little being pushed into the price. And the margins of food companies are sliver thin. The reason why the quarterly earning calls are so tough is because they're actually only met often through financial gains and not actually through operational gains, because the system has been going to its breaking point little by little. And on the other hand side, there's data, for instance, Intrinsic Exchange Group has computed this, that if you manage land differently, and I'm talking both working land, so agricultural land, and conservation land, we actually have an opportunity to generate 125 trillion US dollars in ecosystem services capacity every year. That is more than the world's cumulative economy. So that's for me what I mean with telling better stories. The story has to be told in a way that the CFO is driving the conversation. I've been saying this week, as people in sustainability, our job is to put all the CSOs, all of us, out of a job, because it needs to be simply driven as a business decision.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So I want to talk to you all about sort of if we want, you know, if we want this better business to be sort of the norm and not the exception, how can we accelerate that? What are the levers that will accelerate this process?
I mean, I do think doubling down on what Merlin just said, we need better stories, you know. We talk a lot about data. Data alone don't move societies. It's the way that we wrap data into credible stories that really moves the needle, so I think that's one. I think really continuing to find opportunities to improve, you know, the outcomes of businesses while they're improving their sustainability strategy. I know it isn't always the case. There are tensions. There are real tensions. But the more times that we can show that revenues improve, that costs decrease, that risks are mitigated, that new markets are open, that employees are retained, I think it's really important to highlight those times when sustainability can be a win-win.
Yeah. Thank you. Rihanna?
Well, I think, you know, going back to your first question, we have to think about also what's missing in terms of like policy and metrics and how we're measuring things. I often think about the fact that like when economists measure, you know, the input of the workforce, they often miss the input of women that stay at home when they generate, you know, tens of thousands of dollars for the economy. You know, each woman that just stays at home, and they're not a part of like the measurement of workforce. Right. And there's so many metrics that we're not instituting through policy, and I think there's really opportunities there, and that feeds into storytelling, that feeds into reporting that we do nationally and globally and even locally. I also believe that we have to continue to find ways to think about the groups of storytellers that are missing. I think even here in the space, there's an opportunity to think about the real true shifts in marketing and how people access information. I think there are a lot of young Gen Z millennial influencers that aren't at these conversations, that sometimes are looked at as you know, not experts in the field. I was recently selected to be a creator for Kamala, and there were 200 of us that were just selected for random reasons, but there were tons of articles that came out that pitted us against journalists over the past few weeks, and we actually got twice as many. We got 500 million, the RICA DNC got 500 million views on our content, twice as many as like traditional journalists. And I think those shifts are real, and we have to be really honest about, you know, how the world is changing with new technologies.
I love those shifts too. I was on a panel this week with young influencers, and they were incredible, and I learned so much from them. And like, you're right, there's this tendency to sort of like, oh, that's not real, and the rest of us are doing something real, but that's not true. Yeah. We have to listen to the young people, as we heard on the last panel. I just, I want to give you all the chance to give a call to action in the final 2 minutes we have. Maren, what's your call to action for everyone in this room?
So get your bullshit bingo cards out. It's collaboration. But it's not to write another white paper. It is actually to take a region, for example, in the food system. Take a region, look with organizations like reinsurance, like Swiss Re, who know what we would think of, and actually figure out that they are no longer reinsuring those regions because of all the risk. Therefore, there are business cases to be made to help them de-risk capital that then can help finance the transition, which can help reduce the burden on the farmers, which needs longer-term off-take agreements, over-diversified crop streams. All of that work, that's real collaboration. Writing another paper on what the perfect NDC looks like is only going to waste paper.
Thanks, Maren. Philip. You can clap.
Whether you are in international development or in food manufacturing or in banking or in farming or in eating, diversify your portfolio.
Right on. I love that. Thank you, Philip. Julia.
The cash needs to flow. If you're an investor, send the term sheet. If you're a large enterprise company, issue the purchase order. If you're an eater, buy the product. We need more dollars flowing in the right direction.
Thank you. Rihanna, last word.
I would say hire more non-traditional roles to the C-suite. We need more CMOs and CIOs and chief sustainability officers that have never carried these roles before, but understand through their traditions, through things that they've picked up on in global economies across the world to be in leadership. And I truly believe that's the future.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, friends. Give them a round of applause. You are all incredible. Thank you. Thank you. We're now going to give, thank you, Rihanna. We're now going to give my friend Evan Fraser the space of the entire stage to talk to us. So over to you, Evan.
Thanks, Danny. Food Tank friends, Arrell Food Institute friends, NPR friends, thank you so much. And it's really cool to be up here. So Bernie, Alice, thank you. I'm going to start on a somber note and then pivot to an uplifting note. And about 18 months ago, I had the very great privilege of being nominated by the Canadian government to sit on the high-level panel of experts on the Committee on World Food Security, which Shakuntala knows well. If that's not a word soup mouthful, only a big bureaucratic organization could call something that, eh? HLPE is what we sort of short form it, and its job is to provide advice to the United Nations on important topics. And we were asked earlier this year to write a very depressing briefing. What is the effect of conflict on food security and nutrition around the world? And it was specifically inspired is a terrible word to use, but I can't think of a better one, inspired by Gaza and Sudan, amongst other conflicts. So I found myself spending a lot of time this summer drafting text, reviewing evidence, and if you're interested, the HLPE's website has the briefing report. It's out now. One of the most depressing and draining tasks of my entire career. Among the many sad things I learned is the effect of famine and food insecurity last generations. If there is a pregnant woman in Gaza or Sudan experiencing food insecurity today, her grandchildren will be at elevated risks of catching infectious diseases. 2 generations. The reason I mention this is, of course, to remind us that the food system is failing far too many of our fellow people, but also as a preemptive call to action to everybody in this room. Food system leaders, if we don't get this right, we will be paying the consequences for a very long time. So that's the depressing part. I'm now going to pivot and try to talk about the art of the possible with 2 quick anecdotes, scene paintings. In the first scene, you have to imagine a nondescript industrial park on the outskirts of a nondescript rural community in the central part of British Columbia. The sun is high in the sky, the mountains are beautiful, there's a gorgeous lake in the bottom of the valley, the sun is glinting off of it. I really want to go swimming, but I'm there at the request of a serial entrepreneur to visit Canada, arguably North America's newest and possibly most sophisticated vertical farm. This is a box, hermetically sealed, that produces lettuce. One of the things that's interesting about this particular vertical farm, called Avery Farm, is that it does head lettuce. Most vertical farms in operation today produce microgreens or baby greens. So if anybody wants to geek out about lettuce tech, come talk to me. It's really cool. Did the tour. I was pretty impressed by the tech. This is a technology which I have spent a lot of time thinking critically about. And then we did something amazing. We had a lettuce tasting. I'd never thought of doing a lettuce tasting. Scotch, yes. Coffee, yes. Chocolate, absolutely. Maybe wine. Lettuce is just as good if you do it right. Like, it's amazing. We had all these different kinds of lettuce. We were filling out forms. Also, you dig under the surface. Their costs are coming down. It's not an expensive way of producing lettuce today. I didn't know that. Almost no land, almost no water, no pesticides, a nutritional profile that beats anything on the market on a side-by-side comparison of vitamins and minerals. And because British Columbia's electricity grid is fairly carbon neutral, not a lot of greenhouse gas emissions associated with that lettuce. Sustainable, affordable, nutritious, like what's not to like? So I asked Gary, the serial entrepreneur, about it. I mean, I've known Gary for years. He asked me to come out and provide some technical advice to their team. And in conversation, I discovered, and I've been curious about this for years, because he's been working on this project for about 4 years, which incidentally started selling lettuce into British Columbia last Sunday. So they brand new story. Said Gary, I got up the courage to ask Gary how much it cost him to build this facility. And it was a $35 million capital expenditure. I was like, whoa, Gary, that's a lot of money. Why did you do that? Build a box to grow tasty leaves? And he said, well, Evan, I mean, 10-year ROI period, not a bad business investment. But then he kind of laughed and he said, well, to be honest, could have put the money elsewhere in the economy and worked way less and got way more. But then he said the real answer, and here he sort of looked up at the mountains and scratched his head a bit. So the real answer is about resilience and food system transformation. He said it's crazy that British Columbia imports all this lettuce from water-parched California. The quality of the product on the market is way less than I can do. And I don't think that if people like me don't invest in the food system, it's going to work for my generation, or my grandchildren's generation. I said, okay, Gary, thank you for your leadership. Anecdote number 2. Other side of the planet, last May, I found myself in Sierra Leone at the request or the invitation of the president of Sierra Leone, who has emerged in recent years as an extraordinary global champion of food systems transformation. And I was invited to provide some leadership and do some chairing of some meetings that was bringing Sierra Leone, Malawi, and Ethiopia, civil society and government together to develop more resilient pathways to food system transformation. This was all part of an Irish Aid-funded project under the auspices of the Global Panel for Agriculture and Food Systems for Nutrition, another great big mouthful. And before going to Sierra Leone, which I'd never been to before, I asked my friend Patrick, who works in the president's office and leads their climate and food security work. I said, Patrick, if I'm going to chair these meetings, which I'm very honored to do, I really would like to learn a little bit about your country before I start chairing these meetings. So could you arrange for me to get out into the countryside for a few days, drive up into the hills and whatnot? And so we did. We took a tour. And on the first day of the tour, we went away from the coast and up into the hills. And there I witnessed what probably should be called a post-apocalyptic landscape. Rampant deforestation for oil palm, ravages of climate change, landslides, incredible poverty and food insecurity, all against a backdrop of post-conflict because of Sierra Leone's terrible civil war, and not just the COVID, but also the Ebola crisis, which was more significant for Sierra Leone, significantly more significant for Sierra Leone than COVID was, for us, for instance. So, wow, this was a depressing moment. It was a horrific set of images. And remember, Sierra Leone is native chimpanzee habitat. So arguably this should be the most protected ecosystems on the planet, or terrestrial ecosystems on the planet. But I didn't end that first day anyways feeling depressed. It was forward-thinking, entrepreneurial, innovative, clear-eyed, energetic. Those are the feelings I took away from that against this very, very sobering backdrop. The next day, Patrick wanted me to see a couple of fish processing plants. And so we went down to the coast and drove along the road that goes along the shoreline, and it was much prettier, I'll be honest. And we stopped at a couple of fish processing plants. And the first one was quite small and humble looking, nothing more than a cluster of cinder block buildings with some charcoal fires and then racks of fish, drying and being smoked around it. This was right nestled within an incredibly chaotic, smelly, dirty into the food system. Now you may be sitting there and thinking, well, I've heard all of those 4 strategies repeatedly, again and again. Those aren't particularly revelatory. And that's exactly the point. It's not like food systems transformation is requiring us to fly off to Mars and build a new community up there. I've done that. I've written a book about that. It's really going to be hard to do that. I wouldn't bet on that one. It's not like for food system transformation we need cold fusion in a bottle. It's just pedestrian. It's going to take effort, but it's pedestrian, normal, sort of everyday things that will affect food system transformation. And that very sort of banal nature of our strategies is what gives me hope. So as I wrap up and bring Danny back on stage in just a second, my call to action is to think how us as food system leaders in our respective roles in our respective institutions, how can we unblock or remove the obstacles that the innovator and the entrepreneur, again, commercial or social, I don't care, how can we unblock their pathways to success? Because that's the theory of change which I think we should bet on. And if we don't, to bring this full circle back to my very depressing experience this summer writing this briefing note on Gaza and the Sudan, if we don't, the consequences of failing at this job will be felt for very many years to come. Thank you, and Danny, come on back.
Everyone stay seated. You do not move, okay? I'm looking at each and every one of you. We have a delicious lunch, and I don't want you to miss it. And I want to thank Great Performances again for providing that. Evan, what an incredible day so far, right? Woo. This has been great. Congratulations.
Congratulations, too.
I'm wondering if you can reflect a little bit more on what you heard. You talked about the systems thinking. What were some of the highlights today for you?
Well, bullshit bingo.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of 5 exhausting, over-socialized days where my extrovert juice has been completely used up, and I just need to curl into a ball on the airplane in a few hours. Yeah, I mean, I'm filled with that, duality of optimism and pessimism.
Yeah.
And I'm so inspired by a lot of what we've heard, and we have to have our bullshit attenuators out.
Yeah, those detectors need to be there.
Because it's crucial, and it's incumbent on us to call the BS out and to work on the pathways of real change.
And there's just no time for it anymore. I'm sick of it. I mean, maybe it was fun for a few years, bullshit, but I'm tired of it.
Yeah. I mean, I've got big conference fatigue. I think we all do, and we need to rapidly, existentially move beyond talk and into action. And it's happening, and we're moving a giant set of systems. So I'm not pessimistic, but I am getting tired.
Yeah, and that's something we all have to combat, that we don't want to burn out, literally or figuratively.
On any scale, personal or planetary,
right.
No burning out.
What I am inspired by is the youth panel. I thought that was exciting. I am excited by people like Julia Collins who are changing industry, and Rihanna and others, and Philip and, Marin with his bullshit detector. But I think what's, I think what most stands out for me is that, like, this is so crucial that we have to do it now. We can't wait for others. I think when I was 25, I thought someone else would do it. And now that I'm much older than that, I know that we are the ones who have to do it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's 2 things. I mean, I'm now north of 50, and so thinking, all right, I've got hopefully a couple of good years left, but not as many as I used to. And then a couple of years ago, I started working with a group of corporates in Canada that we ultimately formed a new organization called the Canadian Alliance for Net Zero Agri-Food. And we've been working on this for about 3 years. And at the time, as I recall, there were still 7 harvests left before we hit our 2030 targets. And now, well, I mean, we're down to 5, really. And I mean, progress has been made, but it's directionally okay, but not the tempo that we need. And I'm not saying anything that anybody in this room doesn't know about, but I feel that countdown to 2030 viscerally. It literally keeps me awake at night. And throwing my personal shoulder to the wheel for the last 25 years, I don't know, how much do I have to show for it?
Oh, so much, Evan. No, you have
You're being very generous.
No, you do. I mean, otherwise, Food Tank wouldn't work with you or know who you are. You've done so much. Do you know what I mean?
Thank you.
I love. No, I mean, honestly, and I love that you mentioned tempo. That's like such a creative way to look at this. The tempo of the momentum we need to create. I'm sorry, I'm losing my words. It's been a long week. But I think that's great, and it gives me such encouragement. I want to talk about collaboration because that's been a theme throughout the day. How do we encourage more of that? This cross collaboration, the silo breaking, that knocking down these walls, talking and listening to youth, listening to those with lived experience, getting farmers' input, getting them at the table, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my whole career has oriented in some ways around developing multi-stakeholder collaborations, for lack of a less wonky way of saying it, building people that know and like and trust each other and, feel they can work together on a common purpose. It's hard, as everybody in this room knows, and one of the things that deeply concerns me is the way in which systemic structural barriers prevent fulsome engagement. And it's just way too easy to default to the people that I speak the same language to, that I share a gender and a racial background to, that I, in my case, share a tremendous amount of privilege with, and how to break those structural things down to give space to a truly fulsome and diverse set of perspectives, which means that those in power have to cede ground to those not in power traditionally, and we need to be creating very, very deliberate structures that provide funding for equity-seeking and equity-deserving groups to attend expensive events and things like that. And we need to be providing legal advice to racialized NGOs to be able to talk in the right language to the corporate sector. And that's hard.
Yep.
And I can say it rolls off the tongue, but it's hard.
It's hard, but it's needed, it's difficult, but we have to be intentional. And we have to be deliberate, and we have to keep fighting the good fight. I do want you to leave this audience. You're kind of being a downer, Evan.
Oh, no,
I want you
sorry.
to leave this. I want you to leave this audience with what what we can look forward to. So we have, and I'm not just talking about COP29 and COP30 and whatever. Like, what are the things that within your research you talked about? What you're seeing across the globe. What are the things that that give you hope every day? Because honestly, you wouldn't be able to get up and keep doing this work every day if you didn't have these nuggets that were just inspiring you.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, maybe this isn't an uplifting way of describing it, but in 2018 and 19, I worked on a book called Uncertain Harvest, which was all about policy and how we had to get the right levers of policy pointed in the right direction to affect change. And then during COVID, my best friend Lenore Newman and I started imagining, well, if Elon Musk gets to Mars, what's he going to eat? And this was totally a COVID project. And we wrote another book called Dinner on Mars, where we tried to thought experiment the idea of what it would take to build a Martian colony, which was a perfect thing to do in the summer of 2020 and into the winter of 2021. And both books are out. I think I've got a couple copies of Dinner on Mars in my backpack, which I don't want to take back to Canada, so I think I've got 2 sitting in my bag, so if anyone's interested, I can give them to you. Well, the depressing part about that was that between writing those 2 books, one that the research was done in 2018-19 and one the research was done 2021-20, we had fallen behind on so many key indicators. But, and this is where I'd sort of started changing my tune, the technological advances were significant. Vertical farming was becoming viable. Another topic which I get really excited about, but also critical of, is alternative sources of protein, not as a replacement to livestock, but as a part of the protein portfolio that we're going to need to embrace. And I got convinced, perhaps because Lenore is super techno-optimistic, my writing partner, I got convinced that there are phenomenal new ways of doing things which break the old assumptions apart. Like Gary, the lettuce entrepreneur, who is now talking to sell his lettuce into California supermarkets, which is a stunning reversal that we may have fresh, healthy lettuce moving from the interior of British Columbia to California.
Yeah, I love it.
Who could have done that? Even imagine that 3 or 4 years ago. So what gives me hope isn't just the technology, but the technology plus the governance, plus the engagement and the participation and the transparency. That together means we don't have to have a repeat of the past. We can do things moving forward. And that deep dive that me and my friends at the Arrell Food Institute did in terms of those 4 very pedestrian strategies, it's not rocket science. We can do this.
Right.
We just have to choose to.
Right. It's like breaking bad habits. You can do it. I personally hope Elon goes to Mars. I am happy to continue this work on Earth.
It won't be tasty.
It won't be tasty. Earth is delicious. Let's stay here. Let's keep doing this hard work. Please thank Evan Fraser and the Arrell Food Institute. He's been amazing. I want to thank all of our speakers who have joined us today. They've been incredible. I've learned so much. I want to again thank Arrell. They are just what a great institute to work with. The smartest people in the world. Thank you to WNYC again and all of our friends here. Thank you. I can't talk. Thanks to all of you who joined us online. I know it's sometimes difficult to watch the live stream when you're not in the room, but we try to make it as easy as possible for you all. And for everyone here in person, go eat lunch, go have fun, go talk about these things and eat well and enjoy the rest of Climate Week. Thank you.